It brings indescribable sadness to know contributed significantly to her fear, paranoia, and isolation.
The room did not erupt when Prince William spoke. It became completely still. King Charles stopped moving, Camilla's expression hardened, and every advisor around the table understood that the future king had just drawn a line no one could quietly erase. William's words were calm, but their meaning was devastating. Camilla would never be permitted to wear the personal royal pieces most closely associated with Diana. This was not a request. It was a final declaration. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William had entered the private Windsor meeting expecting a discussion about an upcoming state reception. Charles sat beside Camilla, while Catherine and Princess Anne faced two senior Royal Collection advisors across the table. The Royal Collection is the group of historic artworks, jewels, and ceremonial objects held for the monarchy and preserved across generations. That made the meeting more than a wardrobe discussion. Every decision carried questions of memory, ownership, public symbolism, and who had the right to represent the past. William named the restriction precisely. Camilla would never wear Diana's sapphire choker, the emerald necklace his mother once wore as a headband, or any personal item publicly identified with her. The prince did not speak in anger. He spoke with the certainty of someone who had waited too long to say what others preferred to avoid. Camilla remained rigid as each piece was named. She did not interrupt, yet her fingers tightened around the arm of her chair when Diana's name was spoken for the third time. Charles noticed. The king quietly asked whether such a public restriction was truly necessary. William answered that protecting his mother's memory was not an attack on his father's marriage. It was a boundary the monarchy should have respected without forcing him to defend it. One advisor slowly closed a red inventory folder. An inventory folder was the official record showing where royal objects were stored, who had requested them, and how they were being prepared. He then admitted that one of Diana's most recognizable pieces had already been selected for Camilla's fitting. Catherine followed the queen consort's glance toward a velvet presentation case near the advisor. The princess understood immediately that the disputed jewel was already inside the room. William rose, walked toward it, and placed both hands on the lid. He closed the case and pushed it back across the table without raising his voice. Anne finally broke the silence. Through a documented palace instruction she had reviewed that morning, the princess revealed that the confrontation had not begun with a simple jewel request. Someone had authorized the fitting days earlier, without William's knowledge. And when William discovered whose name had been placed on that private instruction, his grief stopped being private, and became a battle over Diana's place in royal history. To the palace, the disputed pieces were part of the royal collection. To William, they carried the warmth of a mother he lost before he was ready to live without her. That difference changed everything. Camilla viewed the jewels as symbols belonging to the crown's present. William saw them as fragments of Diana's identity pieces that could not simply be transferred from one woman to another without rewriting the emotional history of his family. William had never viewed those pieces as lifeless objects. Certain jewels were inseparable from photographs of Diana visiting hospitals, meeting vulnerable families, and standing before the world with a confidence that often concealed private pain. The royal collection was the body of historic objects held for the monarchy, but the prince believed some items carried a personal meaning too powerful to be reduced to inventory numbers. Their value came from who had worn them, what they represented, and what they meant to the sons she left behind. William remembered one evening before an engagement when Diana knelt beside him and allowed him to touch the sapphire stone at her neck. She promised she would return before bedtime. That memory had survived longer than the event itself. To him, the jewel was tied to her voice, her reassurance, and the safety he once believed could never disappear. Camilla carried a different wound. As queen, she was expected to represent continuity during state ceremonies, and palace dressers believed historic pieces helped connect one reign to another. Yet through a private conversation with Charles after the meeting, she admitted that she was tired of entering rooms where Diana's memory seemed more powerful than her living presence. The queen consort did not ask him to erase the past. She asked whether she would ever be allowed to exist without being measured against it. Catherine then discovered that the fitting request involved far more than one necklace. A handwritten list named 3 pieces associated with Diana and described them as suitable for modern reassignment. The phrase meant moving emotionally significant items into new ceremonial use. Anne recognized it immediately. The princess recalled through a documented archive discussion that Queen Elizabeth had once rejected the same wording after courtiers proposed reusing highly personal pieces following Diana's death. Charles later found Camilla alone beside a darkened window. She asked whether she would always be judged against a woman who was no longer there. The king hesitated, and that silence wounded her more than an answer might have. Catherine quietly passed the handwritten list to William. Beside the approval line, he found a set of initials linked to someone inside Charles's household. Those initials would lead William back to one ceremony, one whispered instruction, and the precise moment the disagreement became impossible to contain. The confrontation at Windsor had not begun around a conference table. It began 3 nights earlier beneath chandeliers, cameras, and carefully controlled smiles. During a rehearsal for a Commonwealth reception, Camilla's dresser opened a velvet case and lifted a sapphire choker, known around the world as one of Diana's defining pieces. William saw it from across the room. He did not react publicly, but those nearest to him watched his expression change and knew something inside him had broken. William had entered Buckingham Palace's white drawing room unexpectedly with Catherine. The room was being used for a private dress rehearsal before the reception, where clothing, jewels, and ceremonial details were checked before the public event. Camilla stood beside her dresser in a dark blue gown, chosen to echo historic royal portraiture. Yet the moment the sapphire piece was raised toward her neckline, every careful decision around the event became secondary. The prince froze. He had seen that choker in photographs of Diana smiling through public pressure, meeting dignitaries, and carrying herself with a confidence that hid deep loneliness. Now it was being positioned against the present queen, as though memory could be reassigned by a wardrobe decision. Catherine felt his silence before she heard him speak. Camilla noticed him and removed the piece immediately. She told William that she had not requested a comparison with Diana and would not accept blame for choices made by palace staff. The queen consort's voice remained controlled, but her frustration was clear. She had entered the rehearsal expecting to prepare for duty, not to become the center of another conflict with a woman whose memory still shaped every room. William asked who had authorized the fitting. The dresser did not answer. Instead, she looked toward the king's private secretary, the senior official who manages the monarch's most sensitive business and carries decisions between royal offices. That glance exposed more than words could have done. Charles had approved a general review of underused royal pieces. The king believed the review concerned historic items with no strong personal claim attached to them. But after his signature, the list had been expanded. Diana's most recognizable jewels were added later, turning a broad inventory exercise into something deeply personal. William stepped forward, took the sapphire choker from the dresser, and returned it to the velvet case. He closed the lid and said, "This does not happen again." Then he left, before the rehearsal continued. Camilla watched him go, anger and humiliation rising together. She followed him into the adjoining corridor before any advisor could stop her. Behind the closed doors of that corridor, William and Camilla finally said what years of ceremonial smiles had allowed them to avoid. There were no cameras in the corridor, no advisors standing between them, and no public smiles to soften what followed. Camilla called William back before he reached the staircase. He stopped, turned, and faced the woman whose place beside his father had shaped much of his childhood pain. She demanded to know whether his objection concerned one necklace or whether he had decided she would never be allowed to escape Diana's shadow. Camilla stood only a few steps from the reception room, while Catherine remained farther down the corridor, close enough to hear, but unwilling to interrupt. Charles was still inside, surrounded by staff who had not yet understood that the rehearsal had already collapsed. The Queen Consort told William that the royal collection was not a private family jewelry box. The royal collection is the body of historic objects held for the monarchy, not the personal property of one living royal. She argued that a reigning queen could not perform her role if every ceremonial choice was treated as a provocation. William answered without shouting. He said the dispute was never about denying Camilla access to royal jewels. It was about stopping Diana's personal identity from being folded into someone else's image. The prince could accept continuity. He could not accept replacement disguised as tradition. Camilla's restraint finally cracked. She told him she had spent decades being punished for surviving a story in which the public had already chosen its heroine and villain. Every room, every headline, and every ceremony dragged her back into a comparison she could never win. She had carried the crown's burdens, yet Diana's memory still seemed to hold greater power than her living presence. William then revealed what made the fitting impossible to dismiss as a mistake. The expanded list also included the emerald necklace Diana had famously worn as a headband. Two unmistakable pieces had been selected together. To him, that looked deliberate. Camilla admitted through the private conversation that she had seen the revised list before the rehearsal. She insisted, however, that she believed Charles and the collection office had already secured William's approval. That confession shifted the argument. She was no longer completely unaware, but neither was she the only person responsible. Charles stepped into the corridor as William delivered the sentence no one could soften. "You may wear the crown, but you will not wear my mother." The king stopped beside the doorway, visibly shaken by the pain beneath his son's control. Charles defended neither side. He ordered the jewel case sealed and asked Anne to determine who possessed the authority to decide its future. The argument had begun as a family wound, but Charles's order placed the matter in Anne's hands and turned emotion into royal power. Princess Anne did not raise her voice, choose a side publicly, or offer comfort she did not yet believe was useful. She simply took the inventory folder, requested every authorization connected to Diana's jewels, and locked herself inside the Windsor archive room with the collection registrar. By midnight, the king's sister understood that William's anger was not built on grief alone. Someone had deliberately blurred the line between property belonging to the crown and pieces carrying Diana's personal legacy. Anne carried unusual authority in the family because both Charles and William trusted her to separate emotion from duty. The collection registrar was the official responsible for recording where royal objects were kept, who requested them, and under what authority they could be used. Together, they divided the pieces into clear groups: items owned by the crown, jewels belonging to the Spencer family, gifts Diana had personally received, and pieces later inherited or held for William and Harry. That distinction mattered because custody did not always mean moral permission. Anne understood the pain on both sides. Charles wanted to protect Camilla from another public humiliation, while William wanted proof that his mother's identity could not be repackaged for palace convenience. The princess knew that choosing speed over truth would deepen the wound. She also knew delay could allow someone inside the household to hide what had already been done. Catherine arrived during the review and spoke through a private conversation with no aides present. She admitted that William's fury carried guilt beneath it. The prince believed he had failed to defend Diana when he was a child, even though no child could have controlled the forces surrounding her. Now every disputed jewel felt like a second chance to protect what remained. The registrar then found two versions of the fitting list. The first contained ordinary collection pieces suitable for a state reception. The second added Diana's sapphire choker, emerald necklace, and pearl earrings. The additions were not random. Together, they formed a deliberate pattern. Anne examined the approval stamp. It came from the Queen's Household Wardrobe Office, the team responsible for coordinating clothing and jewelry for official appearances. Yet there was no direct authorization from Charles, William, or the collection trustees. Someone had expanded the request while allowing others to assume approval already existed. Anne placed both lists before Charles. The king removed his glasses, read each page twice, and set down his pen without signing the prepared statement defending the fitting. He now faced three choices: support Camilla publicly, support William privately, or expose the official who had altered the list. But before the king could make that choice, the sealed jewel case disappeared from the wardrobe office and the fallout became far more dangerous. By sunrise, the sapphire choker was no longer where Anne had ordered it to remain. The velvet case had been removed from the wardrobe office, the entry log had been altered, and 2 members of staff were refusing to explain who had issued the instruction. William received the news while having breakfast with Catherine. He set down his cup, read Anne's message once, and stood immediately. The disagreement was no longer symbolic. Someone had challenged his boundary. William learned that the case had been transferred overnight to a secure preparation room inside Buckingham Palace. A preparation room was a restricted area where clothing, jewels, and ceremonial items were arranged before a royal appearance. The Commonwealth reception was only hours away, which meant every delay carried risk. Any sudden change to Camilla's clothing or jewelry could be noticed by staff, guests, and the press before the palace had agreed on an explanation. William believed the transfer was deliberate. Someone wanted the jewel placed directly before Camilla, where refusing it could look like weakness, and accepting it could make the earlier confrontation meaningless. Catherine saw the danger immediately. The prince's boundary was being tested through pressure rather than permission. Camilla received the news separately and felt the trap close around her. Wearing the choker would deepen the conflict with William and revive every comparison with Diana. Rejecting it in front of her own staff could make the queen consort appear powerless inside the household carrying her name. She understood that someone had turned her into both weapon and target. A junior dresser finally admitted through a recorded internal statement that she had received a verbal instruction from Camilla's senior wardrobe advisor. The advisor denied acting alone and insisted the message had come from above. Yet when Charles was confronted, the king denied issuing any command. He immediately suspended the fitting process, exposing a breakdown in control inside the royal household. Orders were moving through the palace without clear ownership, while family wounds were being used to disguise administrative ambition. Camilla entered the preparation room and found the case open. She closed it herself. Then she removed the sapphire-colored gown chosen for the reception and requested a plain ivory dress instead. The decision protected William's boundary, but it also protected her from becoming the symbol of someone else's manipulation. The reception continued without the disputed jewel. Camilla performed her duties, but the victory felt hollow. Afterward, she sent William a private message, requesting a conversation with no Charles, Catherine, Anne, advisors, or staff present. For the first time, neither the king nor the institution would stand between them. Only William, Camilla, and the memory, both had spent years confronting in different ways. The private meeting lasted less than 20 minutes, yet it changed the meaning of the entire conflict. Camilla arrived without jewelry, without aids, and without the defensive confidence she had carried through the Windsor confrontation. William was already waiting beside the fireplace. Between them sat the closed velvet case. For once, they were not the queen and the heir. They were 2 people facing the same absent woman, one carrying grief, the other carrying the consequences of having replaced her. Camilla had chosen a small sitting room at Clarence House, with no palace officials, written agenda, or prepared statement between them. Clarence House is the royal residence long used by Charles and his household, but this conversation was deliberately stripped of institutional formality. That mattered, because neither side could hide behind advisors or procedure. Whatever understanding emerged would have to come from honesty rather than authority. William spoke first. He explained that his declaration applied only to a defined group of pieces personally identified with Diana. The prince was not challenging Camilla's wider access to the royal collection or denying her right to wear historic jewels as queen. He was protecting objects so closely tied to his mother's public and private identity that reusing them would feel like rewriting her place in the family. Camilla admitted that Diana's name had followed every discussion of her role for decades. The constant comparison had created resentment, and she no longer pretended otherwise. Yet she insisted she had never wanted to turn the late princess's image into part of her own wardrobe. The queen consort wanted recognition for the duties she had carried, not borrowed affection created through someone else's symbols. William's restraint weakened. He confessed that seeing the sapphire choker held against Camilla's neck had made him feel as though his childhood memories were being reassigned without his consent. The jewel was not merely famous, it belonged to a moment when Diana had still felt close, protective, and permanent. Camilla then revealed, through their private conversation, that a senior wardrobe advisor had urged her to wear the piece because it could create an image of reconciliation through continuity. She rejected the strategy completely. Reconciliation, she said, could not be manufactured by placing one woman's symbol on another woman's body. Camilla pushed the closed case toward William and promised to formally withdraw any future claim to Diana's signature pieces. He did not thank her immediately, but the tension in his shoulders began to ease. Together, they agreed that Charles must announce a permanent distinction protecting Diana's personal legacy before the dispute became public. Their private understanding was fragile, but the statement prepared for the world would decide whether it became reconciliation or another royal humiliation. The story reached the public before the palace statement was ready. By morning, one photograph dominated television screens and newspaper stands. Camilla arriving at the Commonwealth reception in an unadorned ivory dress, wearing none of the sapphires selected for her. Beside that image appeared William's extraordinary declaration, "Camilla will never wear what Diana wore." What had begun behind palace doors was suddenly a national argument about grief, succession, loyalty, and memory. The palace moved quickly to contain the damage. A formal clarification confirmed that selected pieces strongly associated with Diana would be protected from future reassignment and preserved for her descendants. Reassignment meant allowing a royal item to pass into new ceremonial use, even when its ownership had not changed. The statement did not remove Camilla's general access to royal jewelry. It created a symbolic boundary around the late princess's most personal and recognizable pieces. William's supporters saw the decision as a son finally defending his mother's identity. To them, the prince had refused to let Diana become a collection of symbols available for palace convenience. Others believed the wording had publicly wounded Camilla, even after she had privately accepted the restriction. The queen consort had chosen the ivory dress herself, yet the public treated her restraint as defeat. Charles watched the coverage from Clarence House and felt the family compromise slipping away. The king had hoped the private agreement would protect both women from another cruel comparison. Instead, every broadcast placed Diana's memory beside Camilla's living role and demanded that viewers choose between them. His sadness came from knowing that peace had been reached privately, but transformed into conflict publicly. Broadcasters soon focused on a more dangerous question: who had leaked William's exact words? Only a handful of people had heard the declaration inside Windsor. The phrase had not appeared in the prepared palace statement, which meant someone had carried it directly from the meeting into the press. Anne traced the leak through a documented internal inquiry. The princess concluded that the suspended wardrobe advisor had released the sentence before being removed from palace duties. The advisor wanted Camilla portrayed as a victim of William's authority, hoping public outrage would shift attention away from the altered fitting list. Outside Kensington Palace, visitors began placing white roses beneath Diana's memorial gates. One handwritten card captured the public feeling. A son remembered what the palace tried to reorganize. The message spread because it turned a jewelry dispute into something deeper, a battle over whether emotional history could be managed like royal property. William now faced a final choice. He could soften his words to protect Charles and Camilla, or confirm that the boundary remained absolute. When father and son met that evening, there was no jewel case left to argue over, only the painful question of what loyalty to the dead requires from the living. The final decision did not belong to a wardrobe advisor, a newspaper headline, or even the anger that first brought William to his feet. It belonged to the family members who had lived for decades beneath Diana's absence. Charles accepted that certain symbols could never become neutral royal property. Camilla accepted that wearing them would create pain rather than continuity. And William accepted that defending his mother did not require destroying the dignity of the woman who now stood beside his father. Charles signed a formal household directive separating Diana's signature personal pieces from the general rotation of royal jewelry. A household directive is an official instruction governing how royal staff must handle a particular responsibility. This one mattered because it replaced uncertain custom with a permanent boundary. No dresser, advisor, or future courtier could quietly reinterpret the family's wishes again. The directive placed the sapphire choker, emerald necklace, and selected pearl pieces under protected custodianship for Diana's descendants. Protected custodianship meant the jewels could be preserved, documented, or displayed in approved historical exhibitions, but they could not return to ordinary ceremonial use. William understood that preservation did not hide his mother from history. It stopped history from borrowing her identity without consent. Charles then addressed the pain caused by his son's public words. The king told William that the original declaration had wounded Camilla and reduced a complicated agreement to a brutal comparison. Yet he also admitted that the boundary itself was necessary and should have been established years earlier. His silence had allowed confusion to grow until grief became confrontation. William did not retreat from the promise. The prince said he regretted the harshness that reached the public, but not the meaning behind it. Diana's identity could never become a costume of royal continuity. He could respect his father's wife without surrendering the symbols most deeply tied to his mother. Camilla ended the final doubt herself. Through the signed directive, the Queen added her name beneath Charles's and formally withdrew any future claim to the protected pieces. Her decision made clear that she had no wish to manufacture acceptance through Diana's image. It also secured her own dignity by separating her role from a comparison she could never escape. William later carried the closed sapphire case into the secure collection room. Anne unlocked the cabinet, while Catherine remained beside him. The future king placed the case inside without opening it. He did not leave triumphant. He left calmer, because the act was not a victory over Camilla. It was a son finally giving his mother's memory a boundary the palace could no longer cross. The monarchy survived by accepting that history could not be honored through imitation. Camilla's position remained secure, Diana's symbols remained protected, and William's promise became permanent. The sapphire case was locked, the directive was signed, and the matter was finished. Camilla would remain queen, but what Diana wore would remain forever connected to Diana. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.